Honda's CR-V might not initially seem to be the most striking ownership proposition in the compact SUV sector, but look a little closer and you'll find it to be a very solid ownership package indeed, especially in this fourth generation guise where there's a choice of 2- and 4-wheel drive, a selection between more efficient petrol and diesel power, and a more versatile cabin. Live with one and you'll find it a hard car not to like.
How do you write a bestseller? This is Honda's answer. The fourth generation version of a compact SUV soft-roading CR-V model that over the last 2 decades has found over 5 million global buyers in over 160 different countries. The changes provided here aren't radical, but they are significant, as is necessary in a segment now saturated with clever rivals. So we've a smarter shape, a more versatile cabin, more efficient engines and extra high-tech equipment. The headache for Honda here is that all of its obvious competitors in this sector have recently launched rival models claiming much the same, which perhaps explains why this isn't a car that jumps out at you from the spec sheet. You have to use it, drive it, fill it with family. Many of those experienced in doing just that probably won't even look at the alternatives before replacing their second or third generation CR-Vs with this Mark IV model launched here in the autumn of 2012. It does, after all, offer a depth of engineering that more recent class entrants just don't have. But will that be enough to deliver the new customers that Honda so desperately needs? That's exactly what we're here to find out. Those looking for a compact SUV with the sharpest on-road handling have rarely tended to end up at a Honda dealership. Instead, they've gravitated towards cars like Toyota's RAV4 and BMW's X3. Likewise, those looking for a contender in this segment, happy to sit up to its sills in mud, would normally start with a Land Rover or a Jeep product. So where does that leave this CR-V? Scrabbling around for people who don't quite know what they want? Or, as Honda suggests, perfectly positioned for people who don't live to ridiculous extremes? Enormous global sales suggest they may have a point, achieved from the big percentage of customers who just want a compact SUV with a comfortably elevated driving position, offering lots of room and a refined, composed on-the-road experience. It doesn't need to be hugely quick. Doesn't need a yard of ground clearance. No, what it needs to do is that really tricky thing, strike all the right compromises. Now, once you start looking at this car in that light, you start seeing where this Honda CR-V is so clever. You get a choice of either a petrol or a diesel engine, and there's something to be said for both power plants as an ownership proposition. Petrol people get a 155 PS 2-litre iVTEC unit that, like the majority of Honda engines, responds best if you put a few revs on the board. Okay, a lot of revs on the board. It's actually quite fun, snicking up and down the very good 6-speed manual gearbox. But I have to wonder whether it would be quite so appealing if the car was fully loaded and you'd be attempting to get up a snowy incline. If you do get or do go for the petrol version, then you've got another choice to make, because for the first time with this generation model, Honda is offering the option of an entry-level front-wheel drive variant in the petrol lineup, as well as a normal 4-wheel drive version. In normal driving, you probably wouldn't notice much difference between the two. The 4-wheel drive CR-V sends all its power to the front wheels when you're driving on the road, and there's no extra knobs or buttons or levers to have to deal with. It does all the thinking for you, diverting power to the rear wheels as well, only when it thinks the fronts have too much to do. Now, Honda reckons that the majority of CR-Vs will continue to go out of the showrooms with 4-wheel drive, and with a run of bad winters behind us, it's easy to see why. The hydraulically assisted dual-pump 4x4 system of the third generation CR-V has been replaced here by an electronically activated real-time AWD system that reacts quicker when loss of traction is detected. It also reduces weight by 17% and minimises internal friction by up to 59%, which accounts for the improved fuel and CO2 returns that I'll cover later. The front-wheel drive model is 60 kilograms lighter, which explains why its 0 to 62 mile/hour sprint time is a fraction quicker than the all-wheel drive variant. If you're looking for front-wheel drive, you can only get it in conjunction with the 6-speed manual gearbox that I'm using here. And I'd be suggesting anyway that you look at the 6-speed manual. There's nothing wrong with the 5-speed auto option with its slick steering wheel mounted paddle shifters, but unlike higher tech dual clutch auto gearboxes of the kind that you'll find in rival models, it does impact on your fuel and CO2 returns. And in any case, the 5 speeds that the Autobox provides aren't really very many in today's market. In any case, you've really got to dislike stick shifters to pay extra to do without one this good. The delightful shift action that this box has would go a long way towards selling me this car. Not that you're going to be enjoying using it too often if, like most CR-V buyers, you opt for the improved torque and economy of the 2.2 litre iD-Tech diesel that I'm driving here. Now here's an engine that doesn't need to be rode along by the gear lever, prioritising pulling power that's up from the 192 Newton meters you get in the petrol variant to a hefty 350 Newton meters, enough to provide the kind of hefty towing capacity that many owners will want. Hence also perhaps its availability only in all-wheel drive form. Will owners care that this 2.2 diesel develops only 150 PS in a class where some rivals offer up to 180 PS or more? Probably not. This 2.2 is still quick enough to get you from rest to 62 miles an hour in 9.7 seconds, which is about as quick as most CR-V drivers will want to go. Indeed, many of them will probably be looking at the 1.6 litre Civic-derived diesel engine that Honda has also developed for this car. As for the drive experience, well, it's not a memorable one. But neither is there anything about it you'd really be minded to criticise, unless, like me, you'd prefer a bit more feel from the electrically assisted power steering. Honda's development team undertook a test program on European roads to improve the ride quality without compromising this model's car-like handling or high-speed stability, and the result is a car that feels quite up to the class standard on twisting secondary roads. Body control is especially good thanks to low centre of gravity and greater body rigidity, which you'll thank Honda for if you've got kids often made queasy by the kind of low frequency roll and pitch that still afflicts so many SUVs. The other thing I'd mention about this car's road-going demeanour is just how refined it is, even, or perhaps especially, in diesel form. Honda reckons that cabin noise is about half as loud as before, which might be a bit of an exaggeration, but there's certainly been a big improvement thanks to the use of copious amounts of sound-deadening material everywhere from the wheel arches to the front bulkhead, from the bonnet to the double-sealed door frames. All that remains is a bit of tyre noise and a slight bluster from the door mirrors, an impressive showing from the kind of car we tend to think of as boxy and bluff. And off-road capability? Well, I shouldn't get too enthusiastic here if I were you. I've liberally used the term SUV so far in relation to this car, but that really relates more to body style than boundaries of use. There simply isn't the ground clearance, the wheel articulation, or the proper 4x4 hardware to attempt anything much more arduous than a properly surfaced forest track or a muddy car park. Is that a problem? Not really. As with everything else about this car, it simply speaks of a machine designed for purpose. This car will be absolutely fine for icy mornings and towing facilitated by a trailer stability system. You might even attempt a few snowy slopes with confidence, thanks to a hill start assist system that'll get you up them, and if you've an automatic model, a hill descent control setup that'll ease you gently down the other side. If you knew anything at all about Honda CR-Vs, then you probably recognise this one as part of that model line. It's almost as if the Japanese brand's engineers were told to take the third generation version and give it more presence, more personality, more panache, but they just couldn't bring themselves to go too far. Perhaps that's as it should be. The appeal of this model has always been low-key, and you sense that's exactly the way that loyal customers like it. Look a little closer, and to be fair, a lot of work has gone into updating things, with 65% of the structure entirely new. The front end adopts a more dynamic, planted stance with deeply sculpted sides and a bolder nose, emphasised by a horizontal 3-bar grille and deep-set headlights. Moving rearwards, you might not notice that the windscreen has been brought 60mm further forward thanks to the smaller engine compartment. But you might note the subtly flared wheel arches, and at the back, the three-dimensional design treatment applied to the signature vertically stacked rear tail lights. Future Hondas will be more extreme than this, and will need to be in an age where rivals like Range Rover's Evoque have redefined buyers' aesthetic expectations. For the time being, though, this car will blend smartly into the background. And you know what? I don't care. Let me show you why. You can keep your LED headlamp jewellery and your oversized alloy wheels. Personally, what I want from an SUV is stuff I'd benefit from day in, day out. Stuff like this. If you pull the fabric strap that's at the bottom of the rear seat base, the rear seat base tumbles forward, the rear seat back dips down, and the rear headrest tucks in nicely, creating an almost totally flat loading area. It's one of the cleverest seat folding mechanisms around, and it's design that really makes a difference. Design that no one will probably appreciate but you, but maybe that's as it should be. Now, with the seats folded flat like this, you've got a total of 1,648 litres of total carriage capacity, or 1,669 litres if you've got a space-saver rear wheel and tyre. Honda reckons that that's enough for the carriage of 3 29-inch wheel mountain bikes and their riders, thanks to an increase in load bay length of 140mm to create a total of 1,570mm. Even with the 60/40 split folding rear seat in place, there's 589 litres of space on offer. That's 148 litres more than before, and around 25% more space than you get in obvious rivals like Volkswagen's Tiguan, Toyota's RAV4 and the BMW X3. Easily enough for, say, 4 sets of golf clubs. It's easier to get things in too, thanks to the way that the height of the loading lip has been reduced by 25mm. This is just typical of the kind of little design detail that makes this CR-V simply easier to live with than many of its flashier rivals. If I'd bought a BMW X3, for example, I'd be faced with aggro every morning over which child would sit in the middle seat at the back, the unfortunate nominee having to travel the whole way to school with their knees tucked under their chin because of the huge transmission tunnel extending down the middle of the car. In this CR-V, there are no such headaches. Even in a four-wheel drive model like this one, the floor is completely flat. Come to think of it, this really is a remarkably spacious place to sit when you consider that this 4th generation model is 5mm shorter and 30mm lower than its predecessor. And though it's unfortunate that this rear bench no longer slides backwards and forwards as it used to in the old car, the rear seat backs do still recline for greater comfort on longer journeys. It's quite a light, airy place to sit too, thanks to the boxy exterior lines that facilitate a decently sized glass area. At the wheel, only the chunky rear 3/4 pillars intrude on all-round vision, making reversing around a corner a feat that you'll need to complete with the aid of the parking sensors that are standard on all but the entry-level model. As for the cabin itself from the front, well, like almost any Honda I can think of, the driving position is exemplary, with a huge range of adjustment for both the steering wheel and the seats, these items being large enough for the ample American buttocks in this car's largest market. Particularly nice is the way that the gear stick is mounted just a few inches away from the steering wheel for snickety quick changes. As for the instruments, well, I'd expected the Star Trek style arrangement that you get in Honda's Civic family hatch, but instead there's a more conventional layout with a huge speedo flanked by ancillary gauges. To your left, in the middle of the dashboard, lies what the designers rather pretentiously call the information interface zone, that here has the controls for the stereo, but on plusher models would have a 5-inch colour screen for the satellite navigation. Above this lies a smaller colour screen that has details like the time, stereo information and trip computer stats on it, and onto which owners can download their own pictures as backgrounds. Overall, you wouldn't finger this cabin as the smartest in the class, but it's better thought out than most and features exemplary build quality from the British factory in Swindon. One of the most interesting things about the CR-V is the number of potential market segments it can satisfy. Let me explain. If you've got a budget of between £20,000 and £30,000 and you're looking for a compact family-sized, high-riding SUV-style vehicle, there are basically three kinds of product you can look at. At the bottom end of that spectrum are Qashqai-style crossover models that are great to drive, but pretty useless off-road. Next up are Freelander-style small 4x4s that are a bit ponderous on the tarmac, but good in the rough stuff. And beyond that, if your budget can stretch beyond £30,000, you'll find Audi Q5 and BMW X3-style premium compact 4x4s that try and mix all-terrain and tarmac capability in return for a hefty price tag. Across the lineup, priced mainly in the £22,000 to £32,000 bracket, this Honda aims to provide something to satisfy buyers in all three of these categories. It's most likely, though, that potential customers will already be leafing through the glossy brochures for cars like Volkswagen's Tiguan, Land Rover's Freelander and Toyota's RAV4. Against these contenders, well, for petrol people, you're talking pricing with this Honda that'll probably make it about, well, a few £100 more expensive than an equivalent 2- or 4-wheel drive Volkswagen Tiguan 1.4 TSI 160 PS. But it'll be a couple of £1,000 less than an equivalent 4-wheel drive Toyota RAV4 2-litre VVTi. Diesel drivers will also pay a little more than they would for a comparable version of Volkswagen's Tiguan, the 2-litre TDI 140. But they'll be looking at an asking figure almost exactly the same as that required to own a Land Rover Freelander TD4 4x4. Again, the equivalent version of Toyota's RAV4, the D4D AWD, would be a couple of £1,000 more, while if you want to compare against something premium like a diesel version of Audi's Q5, Volvo's XC60 or BMW's X3, then you'll be needing a budget edging up to and beyond the £30,000 mark. Now, if, having considered all this, you decide that it is a CR-V that you really want, then you might need some guidance through a sprawling range that's propped up by entry-level 2-wheel drive petrol variants. Now, personally, I'd think carefully before choosing one of these, given that the running cost advantages over the 4-wheel drive equivalent are slight, and that going from 2 to 4-wheel drive will cost you just £1,100 more. To go from petrol to diesel requires a premium of around £2,000, which means an asking price starting point for the 2.2-litre ID.Tech variants of around £25,000. Whichever CR-V you choose, petrol or diesel, there's a £1,500 premium to get the 5-speed automatic gearbox if you want it. As for equipment, well, Honda is well aware that it can't afford to stint buyers here if this CR-V is not to be mauled by an increasingly impressive set of Korean rivals. So, though the entry-level model must do without basics like a Category 1 alarm and Bluetooth compatibility for your phone, it does get 17-inch alloy wheels, heated door mirrors, daytime running lights, hill start assist to stop you drifting backwards on uphill junctions, dual-zone climate control, cruise control, height and lumbar adjustment for the driver's seat, and USB and iPod connectivity for a 4-speaker stereo you can control from the multifunction steering wheel. As you ascend the range, there are further niceties like a panoramic glass roof, leather seats, a power tailgate, and HDD satellite navigation. Safety is very well taken care of, with even entry-level models getting a whole host of kit, including VSA Vehicle Stability Assist with traction control and an ABS braking system with brake assist to help in emergency stops that'll be advertised to following motorists by an ESS emergency stop signal system that flashes the brake and hazard warning lights as you screech to a halt. Further features include a trailer stability control setup to stop snaking trailers, and on automatic models, a hill descent system to ease you down steep, slippery slopes. If all of that fails to stop you having an accident, then all models, you'll be pleased to know, will get twin front, side and curtain airbags, plus ISOFIX child seat fastenings, anti-whiplash head restraints, and a pedestrian-friendly bonnet. If you want to go further, then you'll need to choose one of the plusher models and, if necessary, tick the box for the ADAS, that's Advanced Driver Assist Systems package. Now, this includes the ACC Adaptive Cruise Control System, which uses a radar to keep you a safe distance from the car ahead on the motorway. It has the LKAS, Lane Keeping Assist System, to stop dozy drivers from veering out of their lanes on the highway. And perhaps cleverest of all, the CMBS Collision Mitigation Braking System that uses that same radar to constantly scan the road ahead for potential collision hazards. If one is detected, the system will give the driver audio and visual warnings, followed by 3 sharp tugs on the seatbelt and a stab of braking. If the driver doesn't respond to that or isn't able to, then a further sharp stab of braking will be applied to decrease the severity of the accident. Now, Honda reckons that if all European cars were fitted with CMBS, then up to a 250,000 accidents could be either prevented or mitigated each year. Now, this was one area where the greatest improvements were needed over the previous generation model, and in response, Honda's engineers have done most of the expected things, most notably fitting Honda's idle stop start-stop system that cuts the engine when you don't need it, stuck in traffic or waiting at the lights, though unfortunately idle stop is only fitted to manual models. However, with it in place, and also taking into account the sleeker bodywork, some fairly respectable fuel and CO2 returns can be achieved. Front-wheel drive petrol models manage 39.2 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and put out 168 grams per kilometre of CO2. And there's not too much of a penalty in opting for four-wheel drive on a petrol variant. The combined cycle fuel economy falls only to 38.2 miles to the gallon, and you get 173 grams per kilometre of CO2. The 2.2 litre iDTEC diesel four-wheel drive version is naturally more frugal, managing 50.4 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 149 grams per kilometre of CO2. Think carefully, though, before specifying the 5-speed automatic gearbox on this variant. Because the auto doesn't get idle stop, you get quite a hit in terms of running costs, with the combined cycle fuel figure falling to 42.8 miles to the gallon and the CO2 figure falling to 174 grams per kilometre. Overall then, at least for manual models, a class competitive set of running cost figures, though more recent class entrants like Mazda's CX-5 have shown that if weight can be reduced, then even more impressive stats are possible. And this is something that Honda still really needs to look at. This generation's CR-V does still weigh in at 1.7 tonnes. Having said all that, in the real world, ultimate economy is very much down to your driving style, improvements to which Honda has given a great deal of thought, primarily through an Eco Assist system that uses a series of colours around the speedometer to demonstrate whether your driving style is conducive to maximum efficiency. If you're driving economically, the colour on the dash will glow green. If you slightly exceed the optimum level of throttle for economic motoring, then the colour change around the speedo will go yellow. And under really heavy acceleration or deceleration, it'll all glow white. You'll soon get the idea. Now, for this setup to work, you'll need to press the green Econ button that's down here on the dash to the right. If you activate it on petrol models, the car will make automatic adjustments for maximum economy to the transmission, the air conditioning and the cruise control. Pressing it on diesel variants like this one only tweaks the aircon. Either way, I can't really see why you'd ever turn it off. Residual values for this CR-V have always been very good, with no shortage of family buyers queuing up to take a well-looked-after car off your hands. A 3-year, 30,000-mile residual value figure of 43% is very good for a model that doesn't wear a prestige German badge. It's easy to imagine yourself as target market for a car like this CR-V. You've a couple of kids, an active lifestyle, a need to haul things around, and an aversion to rather dull large estate cars. But the thing is, you've also an aversion to the kind of Freelander RAV4 type compact SUV soft roaders that such a mindset would normally direct you towards. Understandably, perhaps, you think they're all rather pretentious and silly. But this car isn't an SUV for people who don't like SUVs. A car for people who look at what a vehicle can do for them, rather than what it says about them. End use, you see, has been the overriding design parameter here, not cutting-edge styling, clever gadgetry, irrelevant pin-sharp handling, or pointlessly powerful engines. As a result, it's an extremely easy thing to live with, the kind of car you'll own, then wonder how you managed without. That may not be a recipe for media headlines or supersized sales, but it's an approach that other brands could learn from. And it explains why so many CR-V buys are repeat purchases. This car can't quite pigeonhole itself in any of the market categories you might search in to find potential rivals. Qashqai-like crossover models, Freelander-style practical small 4x4s, or BMW X3 or Audi Q5-like premium small SUVs. Yes, there are elements of all these kinds of cars in this Honda's makeup, but ultimately it remains distinctively different, distinctively CR-V, which ultimately might very well be all you need.